My name is Courtney Lemire. I'm the DEC Region 7 deer biologist, and I'm going to talk about the natural history of white-tailed deer. The white-tailed deer is New York's most popular game animal and the second largest hooved mammal in the state, with moose being the largest. They belong to the family Cervidae. Members of this family have paired antlers that are shed and regrown each year. Prior to European settlement, much of the state was covered with mature forest. Deer, however, prefer edges. Edges are the habitat transition zones along the borders of forest clearings and waterways, or between various habitat types where grass and brush are available for food. So mature forests with little undergrowth provide neither the food nor the cover that deer need to thrive. Therefore, in these mature forests, it's very likely that in pre-colonial New York, deer were restricted to places where disturbances created openings, either by beavers, blowdowns, or fires in the otherwise dense forests. As European settlers entered the state, they added to the forest openings that were already being created by the Native Americans as they cut trees and cleared lands to build homesteads and clear pastures. So shrubs and saplings grew in these openings, creating great forage for deer. An increase in habitat, plus the loss of major predators, led to increasing deer numbers until about the middle of the 19th century. By the mid-1800s, the tremendous increase in farmland, especially in areas outside the Adirondack region of the state, had more than counterbalanced the earlier beneficial effects of predator extirpation and clearing of the land. So edge, again, was greatly diminished, but this time it was because there was very little forest left. In addition, many more people were seeking deer to supplement their food supply. So if each farm family harvested only one deer per year, the total harvest would have been several times the current legal harvest in New York. Moreover, market hunting, which was legal at the time, was taking thousands of deer for consumption by city dwellers. So except in the more inaccessible areas of the Adirondack Mountains, the combined impact of these factors caused a rapid decline in deer throughout the state. By the 1880s, the deer population had reached its lowest point in recorded history. Deer had become extremely rare or were absent in large portions of the state. By 1890, deer had become so scarce in most of the state that market hunting was almost non-existent. Hunting regulations became much stricter in the early 1900s, and deer populations began to build in response. More importantly, large areas of farmland were abandoned during the first half of this century, and this abandoned farmland was soon invaded by shrubs and other pioneer tree species. So habitat conditions once more became suitable for deer in many parts of the state outside of the central Adirondacks. So herds increased rapidly in some areas and more slowly in others, and starvation became serious as deer densities became too high, particularly in a few local areas of the Catskills. Hunting regulations were adjusted to take more animals where they were ruining their own range or causing significant crop damage on the remaining farms. So today, whitetails are widely distributed throughout the entire state of New York, and deer can be found in forested and agricultural areas, even in urban and suburban developments. Only in the most densely populated places are deer usually absent. Over 1 million deer currently inhabit New York State. The white-tailed deer are named for the white hairs on the underside of their tail, which they flag as a warning signal to other deer. A whitetail's keen senses help them detect danger. Few animals have a better sense of smell than the whitetail, and a large portion of their brain is devoted to odor reception and interpretation. Whitetails have excellent vision in low light or darkness, and strong peripheral vision and can easily detect motion. They don't see the colors we do and have difficulty detecting stationary objects. Like most animals that are prey species, their eyes are located on the sides of its head, allowing it to scan nearly 180 degrees. A whitetail's retina is dominated by rod, or also called light receptor cells, making it 1,000 times more sensitive to light than our own. The whitetail's pupil opens much wider than a human's, allowing it to gather 9 times more light. And their large cupped external ears gather and amplify sound. A whitetail's ears are able to rotate in different directions, enabling it to pinpoint sources of sound. Many people don't know that deer are also very vocal animals. Bucks, does, and fawns all make sounds, communicate vocally in some manner. And here's an example of the sound of a doe bleating. And here's an example of a buck grunting. So male whitetails grow and shed their antlers annually. They're also bone-like structures, and they're not hollow. So all of these things make them different than horns. While growing, antlers are covered in velvet, which the buck rubs off once they've hardened. Antler size is determined by age, genetics, and nutrition. In the summer, whitetail coats are relatively thin and they're reddish in color. For the winter, this is replaced by a dense gray-brown coat with hollow outer hairs and a shorter undercoat. The hollow hairs trap warm air and help keep the deer insulated. The mating season is also called the rut. The peak of the rut is mid-November. Bucks usually become sexually mature by their second fall, and most females also begin breeding at the same age. However, doe fawns can and sometimes do breed in their first fall if they've grown large enough. Deer populations can grow very quickly. In just 6 years, 2 deer can turn into 64 deer. The actual reproductive potential is higher where the buck-to-doe ratio is skewed towards does. Due to this high growth rate, if one wishes to have the population remain the same, more than 50% of the herd needs to be removed or die annually, and that's just to keep the population stable. Most fawns are born during May and June in New York. However, births can take place anywhere from March to early August. And fawns can stand within minutes after being born. In good habitat, most does give birth to twin fawns, although triplets do occur, and younger does generally just have 1 fawn. Fawns' coats are camouflaged to blend in with their surroundings, and the spots look like sunlight hitting the forest floor. Does will leave fawns hidden for hours while they feed, and fawns can lay perfectly still in order to elude predators. Adult deer in New York are rarely killed by predators. Predation is most common on fawns during their first 9 weeks. Bears, coyotes, and bobcats are the most common predators. In a recent Penn State study, bears and coyotes were most responsible for predator-caused mortality in fawns, and among those, bears were more common than coyotes. So although predation on fawns can slow population growth, it does not reduce the population size. Deer are herbivores, meaning they're plant eaters, and they're primarily browsers rather than grazers. This means that during much of the year, their diet consists mainly of leaves, buds, and young twigs from trees and shrubs, rather than mainly grass as a grazer would eat. However, deer also eat large quantities of grass and other herbaceous vegetation, especially when it first becomes available in the springtime. Deer need about 5 to 7 pounds of good food each day, and more if it's of poor quality. So this means that each deer will eat more than a ton of food in 1 year. Deer need about 6 to 8 pounds of woody browse per day. This is because it's of lower quality than some of their other foods. And at this rate, about 600 seedlings per pound works out to about 4,200 seedlings per day eaten by deer, or over 1.5 million seedlings a year. So fortunately, most deer have access to other types of foods in the fall and summer, and this woody browse is mostly during the wintertime. Like cattle and sheep, white-tailed deer are ruminants, and they have a four-part stomach. The first part is called the rumen, and it's a large storage chamber. In deer, the rumen can hold as much as 8 quarts of partially chewed food and water. Before passing to the other parts of the stomach, the partly chewed food from the rumen is regurgitated and chewed as cud. This mechanism allows deer to browse and graze rapidly, and then they can retire to safer locations to complete the digestion of their meal. By themselves, they're unable to digest the cellulose and much of the woody types of food that they eat. So they use a combination of microflora in another chamber of the stomach called the reticulum, and this microflora is mainly bacteria. So through fermentation, they're able to convert cellulose into usable nutrients. Deer transition their diet and their digestive system in winter, going from a green diet to a woody one. Winter browse is not very digestible. Major changes in diet require a change in the type of microorganisms needed to break food down. This transition to the new microorganisms required to digest winter food can take 2 to 3 weeks. During this time, little, if any, nutrition is gained by the deer. Feeding deer in the wintertime, although it's well-intentioned, it can lead to the deer's death. When a deer's digestive tract is primed for digesting twigs and buds, they can actually die while having a stomach full of corn. Abrupt changes in the diet can result in a period of time when no nutrition can be gained from the new food, or the changes can cause the deer's microorganisms to die completely. A quick change to a high carbohydrate diet, such as corn or other types of grain, can cause a lactic acid buildup in the rumen. And this leads to ruminitis, which is a swelling of the rumen, and it can cause a condition that is sometimes called corn toxicity, which is lethal. Over generations, deer have adapted to winter survival with physical, physiological, and behavioral changes to better cope with the increased stress of the season. They lower their basal metabolism to conserve the fat reserves they've built up in the summer and fall. They also conserve energy by becoming less active and staying in habitats that offer shelter and access to south-facing slopes for thermal exposure. These fat reserves that they've built up represent a limited amount of stored energy. The faster they're used, the shorter the period of time that a deer can depend upon them for drawing energy. Snow depth, snow crust, temperature, wind, and relative humidity all affect the rate at which the deer utilize those fat reserves. So conditions that make it difficult for deer to move or keep warm can speed up the use of these fat reserves and lead to winter starvation by the end of the winter. Fawns, yearling males, and the old and injured animals are the most likely to be affected during severe winters. The white-tailed deer is a fascinating, charismatic animal enjoyed by New York citizens. With proper management, healthy deer populations can be enjoyed by future generations. Thank you for joining me for this presentation.